Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webcast. My name is Bridget Fleming, and I'm a training specialist with Wickersoft. Today, we're going to be focusing on tips and tricks designed to help you get your projects running off the ground, the early stages. So if you want to know more about Microsoft and who we are today, we're actually a Microsoft joint venture that was founded in 2002. We provide consulting, business process outsourcing, managed services, and global support for staffing. We're a triple gold certified Microsoft partner. Less than 1% of partners ever get to that designation. And we're certified in project portfolio management, collaboration, and cloud productivity. So we have a lot of experience helping organizations maximize their efficiency and technological advantage. We have a footprint all over North America and internationally. We really focus on Microsoft technologies and integrate with a wide variety of other platforms and technologies. From a project and portfolio management perspective, we have a deep expertise on Project Online and Project Server. The webinar today will be recorded, and you'll get a link to the recording and the slides after today's meeting. During the session, you will be on mute, so if you have questions, please feel free to type them into either the chat area or the questions area, and we have some breaking points where I will be answering your questions. So let's get rolling. This session today is the first in a series of 3 sessions that we're going to be presenting. Today we're starting at the beginning, what to do first, what to do in the early stages of your project before you ever start entering detailed tasks into your schedule. In the second session next month, we'll talk about how to determine how long your project is really going to take. We'll be looking at linking, task flows, and estimating. And then in the third session, we'll talk about how to get the work done on the project by discussing working with resources. The format for this webinar is that I'll go through some explanation of the topics with the slides, and then I'll demonstrate the functionality that I discuss. We'll also have some specific spots where I'm going to be stopping for questions. So if you have questions, just type them in and we'll answer them during those breaks. I'm going to be working in Project 2016 desktop for our sessions. However, the things we're discussing also apply to Project Desktop in earlier versions, as well as to Project Pro with Project Online or Project Server. There'll be a couple of places where there are some differences between the two, whether you're working with Project Online and Server or on the desktop, and I will call those out as we get to them. Just a quick little bit about my background so you kind of have an idea of where I'm coming at this from. So I've been working in project management for more than 30 years, and for more than 20 of those years, I've also been working with Microsoft Project. For a little more than 10 years, I've been working with Project Server, and then more recently with Project Online. I also ran a help desk for over 15 years for a Fortune 100 company. We supported Microsoft Project and initially a custom enterprise scheduling system, and then later helped the company implement Project Server. I also had the opportunity to serve as a member of the international core team that developed the PMI Practice Standard 2nd edition, and I was recently selected to serve as the chair of the committee to develop the 3rd edition. So my background is very process focused, and that's how we will be covering the topics today. Often people will jump in and immediately start entering tasks into their schedule. We tend to be really anxious to start thinking about all the work we need to do. This session is going to cover what needs to be done first before we start entering those tasks. We'll be talking about a schedule management plan, which is a document that describes how your schedule will be created, statused, and maintained. We'll talk about project options. These are options that can be set for your projects, and we will talk about the most important ones. There are some of these options that will affect how your project is scheduled, how dates and other information get calculated. So we're going to be talking to those. We'll also talk about a few of the optional ones that you should be aware of. For those of you using Project on the desktop, we're going to look at how to add your company holidays to a project calendar so that your schedule calculations reflect the true work schedule for your tasks. Once we've set up our environment, then we'll talk about how to set our expected project start date and creating and entering into project the work breakdown structure, which we're going to use to represent the deliverables for our project. At that point, you're finally going to be ready to start entering your detailed tasks. Starting at the beginning and understanding where your project came from and why will really help you to understand how to develop a schedule that supports the overall project objectives. To do this, you should review any project information, any project documentation that's available to you. Projects usually start out with a project charter. This is where the project is first identified and approved. The project charter is a brief, high-level document that authorizes the project to be performed and gives the project manager approval to proceed. It's typically issued by the project sponsor. In your organization, the project charter may go by a different name, but it usually exists in some form. It may be called a project request or a project initiation document or something else. The scope statement is the next level of detail from the project charter. It describes the products, services, or results that are expected from the project. It lists deliverables, high-level assumptions, and constraints. Again, most projects will have some kind of a document that includes this information, although it may not be called a scope statement. I'll be describing the project management plan and the WBS in this session, and then in the following sessions, we'll be discussing linking and more about building our schedule model. Another document that comes out of the planning process is the project management plan. The project management plan defines how the project will be executed, monitored, and controlled in many different areas. It consists of one or more subsidiary management plans and other planning documents. Project management plans can be very summary or they can be very detailed. I've seen project management plans that were as small as 5 to 10 pages, and I've seen project management plans that were over 100 pages. On the slide, you'll see a list of the subordinate plans that may make up the project management plan. Which of these plans gets included, as well as the level of detail included in each, should be in proportion to the size and the complexity of the project. Not all projects should have all of these plans. For use with Microsoft Project, the most important elements are the baselines and the schedule management plan. The schedule management plan is one of the critical items that makes up the project management plan. The schedule management plan outlines the approach and the parameters for developing, updating, and maintaining our project schedule. There are a number of elements that should be included or at least considered as shown on the slide. You may have standards in your organization for some or most of the items that exist in the schedule management plan. Find out what already exists for your organization. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel if these decisions have already been made. If you are a Project Online or Project Server user, many of these items may be already established by your PMO or whatever group is responsible for the functional administration of your system. Some of these items may not be relevant to your specific project, but the important thing is to at least think about each of them as they relate to your project so that they're not forgotten. We're going to cover each of these in a little bit of detail. So the first thing we want to think about is roles and responsibilities. And these are roles and responsibilities with respect to the schedule. So not overall project, but schedule. We want to make sure we understand who's responsible for building the schedule, for defining, estimating, and linking tasks, and identifying and assigning resources. Once the schedule is built, does it need someone to approve it? And who decides when the schedule is ready to be baselined? Who's responsible for updating the schedule? And finally, who is responsible for approving changes that take place during the execution of the project? So who can authorize and approve revisions to the schedule? These are all things that should be documented in your schedule management plan. We want to make sure that we understand and document our baseline process. We want to set a baseline on our project to enable us to assess our performance during execution and see when we start to get off track, and also to improve our future estimating accuracy by comparing our original plan to our actual performance at the end of the project and understanding where we went off base. Your company may have standards that specify when and how baselining is done. Prior to baselining, you want to make sure that you have an achievable schedule. An example of an unachievable schedule would be one where the initial plan shows a date for the completion of the project that is either later than the due date or too close to the due date, not allowing enough margin. Another example of an unachievable schedule would be a schedule that has significant resource overallocations. In both of these cases, we need to resolve these issues prior to baselining the schedule. The schedule management plan should describe the processes, timing, and approvals that we need to set the baseline. And then once the baseline's set, under what conditions are we allowed to rebaseline? All of these things should be part of your schedule management plan. The schedule update process. So who is providing the status information? Will it come from individual team members, team leads, or someone else? What information is needed? So this will really depend on how you are statusing and at what level of detail. Are you statusing your schedule directly in the schedule at the task level? Are you statusing at the resource assignment level? How is your statusing being performed? The when, what is the frequency of your statusing? The most common statusing cycle that I see is weekly. So most organizations are doing schedule updates on a weekly basis, but yours may be different. I've definitely seen organizations that are only doing monthly updates or bi-weekly updates. So this is something that should be decided and documented prior to the start of building your schedule and the start of the project. How is this information going to be submitted? So how are you going to get the information about the updates? Will the team leads submit Excel files with update information? Will the team get together in a meeting to incorporate updates into the schedule directly? How will this process be performed? If you're using timesheets or task statusing in Project Online or Project Server, the updates will be coming automatically from each of the team members for their work on each task in your project, and you'll have an opportunity to review and approve and incorporate those into the schedule. Projects almost never end up exactly as planned. The change process must be documented. You need to document who's responsible for identifying and analyzing a potential change to the project. Too often, changes get automatically absorbed into the project, causing scope creep and the inability to be successful and meet your project objectives. If someone, typically the project manager, has the responsibility for identifying and analyzing potential changes, they're more likely to get an appropriate level of scrutiny instead of just being agreed to. Who has the authority to approve changes? Sometimes there's a dollar level that the project manager can approve changes up to, and then if the cost for the potential change is greater than that, it has to go to the sponsor for approval. What are the steps needed for documentation, analysis, and approval for changes to your project? Control thresholds will identify the level for variances to be analyzed and corrective action taken. Not all variances need corrective action. So for example, if I have a year-long project and my current plan shows that I'm in a really good place, my project is completing 2 months before the due date. If I see a variance in my schedule of 2 days, it may not make sense to spend the time or the money to analyze that variance because I have so much cushion right now in my project. So control thresholds can help us identify at what point we might want to dig deeper into variances that we're seeing. And your thresholds can change at various points during the execution of the project. Naming conventions should be documented for your project. So this should include the naming of any versions of your schedule that you plan to save. You also want to make sure you include details about the versioning process itself. So for example, a lot of people will save a copy of their project on a weekly basis, either right before or right after they do their statusing. How that schedule gets saved, where it gets saved, what it gets named, those kinds of things should all be laid out prior to starting building the schedule and the scheduling process. A project calendar needs to be defined. This is going to be the default work schedule for your project. In your schedule management plan, you should describe what the calendar is going to be. What is the main calendar that you're going to be using? And we recommend, if possible, that you use the default standard calendar that comes with project and just make changes to it to add your company holidays. The reason for this is that the standard calendar gets automatically assigned to brand new projects as well as to resources that are added. And this way we don't have to remember to go change the calendar to a different calendar. We can just let it default to the standard if we've incorporated our company holidays into that calendar. You may need additional calendars if you have some tasks that are being worked on a different schedule. For example, maybe you have some burn-in or testing tasks that are going to be running 7 days a week. So in that case, I could define an additional calendar with a 7-day work week and assign that calendar just to those specific tasks that need to work on a different schedule. Project Online and Project Server users will be using enterprise calendars that are actually defined by the administrators and made available to them. So they won't need to create their own calendars, but they do need to make sure that all the calendars that they're going to need for their project are available. And if not, to work with their administrator and identify what additional calendars might be needed. A coding structure can be used to enable filtering, sorting, and grouping of your tasks based on common characteristics. The types of coding will be different for each organization, and you may even have some that are specific to your project. These codes can represent any kind of information, including things like geographic location, task owner, company division, business units. So this allows me to assign to each task in my project schedule some coding. And then this coding will help support reporting for a variety of stakeholders that have different priorities and different focus and need different kinds of information. The coding requirements should be documented in my schedule management plan. We often refer to this definition as a field map. So we're going to identify what information we need and where we're going to put it into the project schedule. There are a lot of available fields in project that can be used to hold this custom information. So you want to identify where that's going to be put. Are you going to be managing resources in your project? If so, will you use generic resources like design engineer, graphic artist, etc., or will you use named resources like John Smith and Susan Jones? Some organizations do strictly task management and don't manage resources at all. Some organizations manage by generic resources only, so by roles, and some use named resources, individual people's names. Sometimes organizations use combinations of generics and named resources. There are many ways to approach using resources in your project, but if you can identify early in the schedule management plan what the plan is to work with resources, what resources you're going to be managing, how you're going to be managing, then you'll be ready from the beginning to make sure that you have all of your tasks and all of your resource assignments aligned with the project expectations. If you're using timesheets or task statusing in Project Online or Project Server, you're going to be using named resources by definition, and possibly some generics as well. So oftentimes, if you're using Project Online or Project Server, you're going to be using a combination of the two. The final three components for the schedule management plan include reports. Do you have any specific standard reports that you'll be producing for your project? So these may be driven by company requirements, or they may be driven by customer requirements. Are there other tools that you'll be using in combination with your schedule? So these are add-on type tools to Microsoft Project. So things like WBS Schedule Pro, which allows you to print out really nice PERT charts. Are you going to use a risk tool like At Risk or Full Monty? So just understanding what tools you're going to use to make sure that as you're building your schedule, you keep that in mind and make sure that any interfaces that are needed are built into the task plan. And then finally, are there other organizational systems like a cost system or something that needs to be integrated with as part of your project? Again, identifying this up front and understanding that will help you as you're starting to build your schedule model to make sure that you've got the right tie-ins that are going to be needed for your purposes. Now that our schedule management is complete, we're finally ready to start working in project. So the schedule management plan should be done up front before we even really create a new schedule. Okay, any questions on that? Any questions on schedule management plan? Victoria, do you see any questions pop up?
No questions have popped up today.
Okay,
but
we will.
Feel free to write in your questions in either the question or chat function.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll continue on. Once we have our schedule management plan prepared, we're ready. We've documented how we're going to create, manage, and update our schedule. Now we're finally ready to work in project. So the first thing that we're going to do is what I call setting up the environment. And this is going to include setting our project options and creating a default project calendar as needed. Both of these can be done one time, and then whatever we've set up can be used in future projects, and we'll talk about that. Once these are complete, we can start identifying the specifics for this project. So we're going to specify the date that we expect the project to start, and then we're going to establish our work breakdown structure. And the work breakdown structure is going to represent the deliverables for our specific project. Project Online users will typically create new projects in Project Web App from an enterprise template. So it may already have a predefined work breakdown structure as well as potentially some predefined tasks also. I'll talk about setting up the environment and initiating the schedule, and then I'm going to demo how to actually do it in the tool. Project option settings are accessed under File Options, and there are basically 7 different tabs that we can use for our project option settings. Many of these options impact only visual elements or user interface functionality. So most of those we're not going to cover because they are strictly a personal preference and you can set them in any way you want. We will look at a few of those, but for the most part, we're just going to talk about the options that affect how schedule dates and other schedule information get calculated. In our project option settings, there are really 2 types of settings, what I call system-wide and project-specific. So system-wide settings means when I make this change to the setting, it's going to be used no matter which project I'm opening. If it's a project-specific setting, any changes I'm making are going to be specifically in the project that I specify. When I'm making my settings for project-specific items, I can specify whether the setting is for the project I'm in, or I can also specify that it's going to be for all new projects. And when I have project option settings that are project specific, I'm going to see a pull down at the top of the group of options, similar to what you're seeing on the slide, that shows, that gives me this pull down opportunity to select either the project that I'm currently in, or actually any projects that I have open, or I can specify all new projects. If I create or modify the settings for all new projects, what that means is any new blank project that I create from scratch is going to have those settings incorporated. If I have existing projects, they will need to be changed one by one. For those of you that are using Project Online or Project Server, or even if you're using Microsoft Project but creating your project from a template, keep in mind that your project is going to inherit the project level settings that are in that project already. So it's important to make sure that when you create your project from the template, that it has all the right settings for your organization. Calendars are accessed under the project ribbon using the button called Change Working Time. And as I mentioned earlier, the recommendation is, if possible, to use the default standard calendar and add your own company holidays. Holidays are added under the Exception tab right here, and we'll be taking a look at exactly how to do that and what it looks like. And again, as I mentioned, Project Online and Project Server users will be using enterprise calendars that are already predefined, so they won't have to go through this definition process. If I've created or modified the standard calendar and I want to save that standard calendar to be used with other projects, I can actually copy it as I'm creating it, as I'm modifying it. I'm actually only modifying the version that's existing in my current project. So if I want to save that, I've added all of my company holidays and I want to save that so that I can use it for all of my projects. What I can do is I can actually copy that calendar back over into a file called global.mpt. And the global.mpt file holds information that is accessible by all of my projects. So what I can do is I can take that standard calendar where I've made the changes and I can copy it over into my global file and replace the default standard calendar. Now the standard calendar, no matter what project I'm using, will include my holidays. Okay, so let's take a look at some of this in project. So I'm going to start off talking about project options. And what I want to do is I'm actually going to kind of talk through a few of the key options that you need to be aware of. I have a project that actually has a little bit of information in it. It's a calendar project that I've created. But you can do this in a blank project if you want to make these settings for all new projects, or if you want to make the changes to an individual project, then you would open that project and then go make your your modifications to your project options. To access my project options, I click on the File tab, and it's this very bottom choice down here called Options. It brings me up into this dialog, and these are the 7 different tabs, the 7 different sections that hold my project options information. So I want to go through them and just kind of touch on a few of the options. I'll specifically point out which ones are key from the perspective of impacting how your schedule information gets calculated. And then I'll also talk about a couple of optional ones that you can really set however you want, but I'll mention some potential options, basically the way I set them up in case it makes sense to you and you're thinking, yeah, that would be good. I would like that to be the same on mine as well. So first, under the General tab, there are 2 options that I just want to mention here. The first one is the default view. So by default, when project gets installed on your computer, the default view that a new project is going to be opened up in is the Gantt chart with timeline view. So that's going to be the actual default that will pop up for any new project. However, the timeline view is actually a report. And because it's a report, I'm not going to be working with it for some period of time because I don't have any data yet. So for me, brand new projects make more sense to pop up in just the Gantt chart. I can build my project schedule, and then later on, I can add the timeline back in and create the timeline view accordingly. The other option I want to mention here is just the date format. So again, this is totally optional and you can set it in whatever way you want, but what I recommend is that you pick the smallest option, the shortest option that gives you all the information you need. So in my case, I pick what is actually the very shortest option of all that gives me month, day, and year. The reason I'm going to talk about a couple of ways that I try to pick options that are short, and it's really to be able to narrow my columns in my table when I'm working with my data so that I can see as many columns as possible at one time. If I have a big long date format, then anytime I display a date, I'm going to have my date field be fairly wide in order to see the whole date. So that's why I choose the short one. If you like to see the day of the week, which a lot of people do, then you can pick something like this option, which will show you the day of the week, but then a fairly short date format following that. The next tab is the Display tab, and I just want to mention a couple of settings here. The first one is down here called Entry Bar, and this one by default is going to be unchecked. So when you first get project loaded, it's not going to be checked here. What the Entry Bar is it's this area right here on your screen. It's just an area where you can do editing to any of the data. So you would click on the cell that you want to edit and then come in here and edit the information. So it's kind of like the entry bar area in Excel, so a similar kind of concept. Some people don't like that. They prefer to edit directly in the cell. So in that case, just leave this option unchecked. If you like to edit up here in this entry bar area, then go ahead and just check this option and it will be visible to you. The other option that I want to mention here is this online status next to name. So if you're using Skype and you're connected to others in your organization, this option by default is checked. And what that'll do is it will show you their availability. But the challenge is if I'm working with resources and I'm assigning resources to tasks, sometimes those status, that status information gets in the way of the work that I'm trying to do. So what I will typically do is as I'm building a schedule, I will leave this unchecked so that I can get everything created and assigned and that type of thing. And then I can always go back later and turn it on if desired. This next section is the schedule section, and this is where all of my really critical options live in terms of things that can affect how my schedule gets calculated. This is also the first place that we're going to see items that are project specific. So this is where I can specify that I either want the settings that I'm performing to be done for a specific project, by default the project that I'm currently in, or I can specify all new projects. Again, if I specify all new projects, it really means new projects. So it's going to be projects that I create from scratch that will inherit all of these settings that I'm about to modify. If I need to change existing projects, I need to actually perform this multiple times, once for each project that I need to change. In this first section, there's really only actually a couple of settings that I want to point out. And if you're using the default standard calendar, you don't need to worry about any of these settings. It's only if you're modifying start or finish times in the standard calendar that this will come into play. And the two that I want to mention are default start time and default end time. So by default in project, the standard calendar runs from 8 to noon and 1 to 5. And if you're scheduling in day increments, so all of your durations are going to be day increments, then I would suggest not touching this at all, and not touching it on the calendar as well. Where these options get used is when I assign a date to a task and I don't specify a time. Project looks here to decide what time is going to be associated with that date, because even though I'm only looking at dates, project is always managing times behind the scenes. So for example, if I put an actual start onto a task, if my task started and I put the actual start date that it started, project is actually going to come here and say, okay, it was a start date, so therefore it was June 5th at 8 o'clock a.m. If I put something like an actual finish, it will say, oh, okay, it's June 10th at 5 o'clock p.m. So this is where project grabs the times if I'm only specifying dates. It does it for actuals, it does it for constraints, those type of things. So what ends up happening is if I have in my project calendar, if I have my day starting at, let's say, 7 o'clock, and here I just still have this at 8 o'clock, what ends up happening is things get out of sync. And I'll start seeing strange things in my project, like durations and or decimal values for things like my total slack. So if you ever see that, make sure that your project calendar you're working with and these settings are aligned in terms of the start and the finish of the day. As I scroll down here further, I get to really the most critical settings of all. So they're here under this scheduling options for this project. And probably the most important one of all is this first one. And part of why it's the most important is because the default is not what you want to use. So by default, all of your new tasks are going to be created in what's called manually scheduled mode. And what that means is that project's not really going to use all the linking and all the information that you've built into your schedule model to do the calculations. I always describe this as you're really using project more like Excel. So it's really allowing you to do some kind of non-best practice scheduling things. So for example, what it does is it turns the duration and the start and the finish fields into text fields. So I can actually enter a duration value that says about 3 weeks. Doesn't make any sense from a scheduling perspective, but that's what manually scheduled will allow me to do. So what you want to do is make sure that when you're setting up your projects and as you're entering information, that all of your tasks are set to auto schedule. That's what's really telling project, I want you to look at all the information I've put into here, and I want you to look at all the linking that I've done, and I want you to use the critical path method process to calculate dates and help me figure out when I can finish this project. The next two really important items are the default task type and the new tasks are effort driven. So these items actually work together, and they really come into play when you start working with resources and hours in your project. There's not a right or wrong answer here for which one of these I should select, whether I select fixed units, fixed duration, or fixed work. The way this works is that project, whichever option I select, is going to try to hold constant that value. So if I select fixed duration, project won't change the duration. If I select fixed work, project won't change the work. So as I modify things within a resource assignment, project's going to recalculate things, but it's not going to recalculate the item that I fixed. Now, to be very honest with you, this is the most complex part of project, is understanding the whole impact of task types and effort driven and those types of things. And we're actually going to talk to that in later webinars and in some of the other two webinars we're talking about. But I just wanted to point it out here in the project options, because whatever settings, whatever task type you decide works right for your situation, for your organization, that's what you want to set this to. This option, auto link inserted or move task, just make sure that one stays unchecked, because what that does is if I insert a task between two other tasks, if that option is checked, project will automatically link those up. And I don't want project making those assumptions for me. I want to make those decisions. The other one that I want to mention here is tasks will always honor their constraint dates. Make sure this one is checked. We want to make sure we minimize how many constraints we have in our project. But if I put constraints in a project, I want project to use those in the calculations. The next option is proofing. This just tells project how you want it to spell check your information. So you can set this up in whatever way you want. The next group of options is the save. These options, again, can be set in whatever way you want, but the one that I want to mention is autosave. Now, I personally don't check autosave, but that's because I'm really, really good about remembering to do interim saves on my project. I save all the time, so I don't actually have to have this turned on. Some people aren't as good about remembering to save, so it may make sense to go ahead and do an autosave, and you can specify how frequently it's going to be saved. But if you turn autosave on, make sure that you check this bottom choice below it, the prompt before saving. When project saves your project, you can no longer undo previous action. So if I'm in the middle of making a bunch of modifications and project hits that 10 minutes and goes ahead and saves, I have no way of backing out of that other than closing and not saving my project. So I can't back out of those actions. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that project warns me before it does this save. So by doing this prompt before saving, project will actually tell me that it's going to save so that it doesn't automatically keep me from getting rid of all those changes that I just made. The next tab here is language, and this just specifies what language you're working in. We're going to be working in English, so I'm going to skip over that. The last one I want to talk about are a couple of options on the Advanced tab. So the first one that I want to mention, again, this is an optional one. It's down here under Display. It's the automatically add new views, tables, filters, and groups to the global. By default, that option is checked. What that means is if I create my own custom filters, tables, views, or groups, when I create them, I'm creating them within whatever project I'm currently working in. If that option is checked, project is going to automatically save those over to my global.mpt file, and then it's accessible from any project. Well, that may be great if I want to be able to use that special filter that I created on all projects, but I may not. It may be a filter that I'm creating that's just specific for this project, or a view that's specific for this project. So that's why I uncheck this. I can myself go in and save things to the global file. I just don't want project doing it automatically for me, because it tends to get things, if you create a lot of custom elements, it gets things very messy. You have a lot of items to kind of fish through in your global file. The next option I want to mention is down here, this display options, and this is one of those that is for, it's at the project level, so I can specify, for this project only or for all new projects. These are truly just display options, and what I've done here, by default, for example, days will get set to day, and all that means is that when I have a duration, any kind of a duration field, what is going to be displayed along with the number. So if I have it set to day and I enter a duration of 5, then project's going to show me 5 space days, D-A-Y-S. Well, I don't need it to spell that whole word out in order for me to know it's days. And again, this is one of those ways that I try to make my columns as narrow as possible so that I can fit more columns on the page. So what I do is I actually select for each of these the narrowest option, so the smallest option available. And that way, when I put 5 into the duration, instead of saying 5 days, project's going to say 5D, and I can make that column narrower. This also plays into that, add space before label. That determines whether it's going to show me a 5 space D or just a 5D. So again, I'm trying to, I always call myself a space hog. I want as many columns visible as I can at one time. So I try to make things as narrow as possible to see the information that I want. So I uncheck that option. So when I put in 5, it's going to just say 5D, and I know exactly what that means. I don't need to see any additional text there. The last 2 options that I want to mention are down at the bottom. So one is the calculate multiple critical paths. I'm not going to go into that in great detail. It's really kind of a deep critical path methodology calculation option. But bottom line is, for those of you that are very familiar with critical path method, what it really means is that it's going to start the backward pass independently. So if I check that, which is what I recommend you do, it will start them independently. This last option is a setting that tells project what to consider critical in your project. We're going to talk more in the next webinar about critical path, but this is the reason that project by default only considers a task to be critical if its total slack value is 0 or negative. And when we talk about critical path in the next webinar, we're going to come back to this option and talk about reasons you might want to make changes to it. So those are all of my project option settings. My key ones really all fall under the schedule option in terms of the ones that can cause my project to calculate incorrectly or not calculate the way I'm expecting. So once I get all of my settings set, then I'm just going to click on OK, and that's going to bring me out. And depending on whether I set for all new projects or I set them for this specific project, that will take effect. I want to just quickly go in and show you the calendar area and how you modify a calendar. So what I would do is I go in here under the project tab and go into change working time. And I've actually already created a couple of holidays on my standard calendar, so I can select which calendar. And again, we recommend you use the standard. I've created a couple of holidays already. And now I'm going to go into November and create my November holidays. So the first one that I'm going to do is Veterans Day. So I'm going to click on the actual day, and then I can just type in the name of the holiday, what the holiday is. And then I just click over here, and by default, it's going to, whatever date I had clicked on here, it's going to set that up as the start and finish for that holiday. I can modify that if I happen to be clicking on the wrong date or whatever, but that's how it's going to do it by default. Another option that I have available for holidays is something like Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving is basically a repeated holiday, right? So what I want to do is I don't want to have to go into every single year and set up where Thanksgiving is. So what I can do is I can set it up on the first occurrence, and then I'm going to go in here, make sure I have Thanksgiving selected. I'm going to go in here under details, and I can actually make it a recurring holiday. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, okay, I want this holiday to recur once a year. I don't want it to always be on November 23rd. What I want is for it to always be on the 4th Thursday in November. So what this allows me to do is set up that type of a recurring holiday. If it is the same date every year for something, I can do that. But here I'm going to set it up for the 4th Thursday in November. And then I can specify how many times I want it to repeat that. So how far out am I defining my calendars? So if, for example, I said, do it for 5, that means I'm defining that holiday for the next 5 years in my calendar. Or I can give it an actual date to stop. So then when I click OK, what's going to happen at this point is now if I go to the next November, I'm going to see that the 4th Thursday has been laid out as a holiday, okay? All right. All right, are there any questions? Anyone have any questions on any things we've talked about so far? I will take that as a no. Okay, continuing on, I've set up my environment. I've got my project options set. I've got my calendar defined. I'm now ready to start working on this specific project, start entering information about this project. So one of the first things I need to do is I need to enter my project start date. My project start date is entered in what's called the project information dialog box, which is found under my project ribbon. This is where I'm going to enter the start date for my project. And I can also, in this same area, enter the project calendar. So by default, it's going to be set to standard, but if I end up using something different for my project calendar, this is where I would set it up. Now we need to start focusing on what the results or the outputs of our project are going to be. So these are the deliverables for our project. At the highest level, there should be an overall deliverable that represents the goal or the objective of the project. And then we're going to break that top level deliverable down into lower level deliverables using an approach called the work breakdown structure. The work breakdown structure is a systematic approach to detailing out the scope of work that we want to put into our schedule model. So it's an outline or graphical representation of the project work. As an outline structure, it looks kind of like a report format, a report outline format. And as graphical structure, it looks like an org chart. Typically for a larger project, you're going to see the WBS look like this because this gets very unwieldy very quickly. So to create my WBS, I'm going to start with the goal of the project, the top level overall output, and I'm going to start breaking that down. I'm going to continue to break down each of my WBS elements into lower level deliverables until I've broken it down to small enough pieces that the WBS element can be understood, planned, and validated for completion. Because these are deliverables, the WBS element names should be defined as nouns. These are things, not actions. Actions are going to be later when we talk about our detailed tasks, but these are the things that we're going to be producing as part of our project. Using this WBS approach reduces the risk in our project by helping us to ensure that we've captured all of the scope. We use the WBS as a communication tool. Once we've developed it, we show it to our sponsor, we show it to our customer, we show it to other key stakeholders to make sure that everyone has the same expected results from the project, that everyone agrees that this is what I'm expecting when you're done with the project. And once the WBS has been agreed to, it's going to represent our scope baseline for our project. From that point on, if something is requested that hasn't been captured in the WBS, then it's not considered to be in scope for the project. We have to treat it as a potential change, look at what the impacts are, go back and ask for more time and or more money, whatever it is. We're also going to use our WBS as the foundation for our detailed planning. So what we'll end up doing is we are going to define all of the detailed tasks that are needed to produce each of our lowest level WBS elements. The WBS elements will be entered into project and they will all end up as summary tasks. So we're going to enter our WBS elements once we've determined our WBS. That's going to be entered into project. And eventually, once we have all of our detailed tasks involved as well, all of our WBS elements will actually be summary tasks in project. As we are entering our WBS elements, all we need to do is type in the task name. So we're just going to type in the name of the WBS element. And then we're going to use our indent and outdent buttons to set up the structure. So we're going to be able to identify what are the sub-elements for a particular element based on the fact that we've indented them underneath and turned this into a summary task. Later on, when we add our detailed tasks, they're going to be added underneath each of our lowest level WBS items, and then those items will also become summary tasks. When I'm working in project with summary tasks, it's critical to make sure that you never type in start, finish, or duration. If you type in start, finish, or duration on a summary task, what project's going to do is it's automatically going to change that task, that summary task, from an auto-scheduled task to a manually scheduled task. Summary tasks should get all of their information from the detail underneath it. And if we type things in, that no longer is going to happen. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So I have a project here that I've entered all of my WBS elements into. At the very top, I have something called the project summary task. This is my task ID 0. And this is something the project creates automatically for me. It's going to be a summary task, and as I start linking things up, it's going to span my entire project. So I can always use this as my overall project deliverable. The way I turn my project summary task on is under the format ribbon, and it's a toggle right here. I can just turn it on or off, and I can tell that it's the summary task because it is task ID 0. What I can do is I can come in here and I can modify the name. So by default, the task name on my project summary task is going to be whatever I saved the project to. So whatever either MPP file name I used, or if I created the project in Project Online or Project Server, it's whatever name I gave it there. What that means is that if I go to print that project out, that is what it is going to consider the project name for that project. If I wanted to have a different name, maybe a different name than the MPP file, I can change the task name for my summary task, And then project's going to use that as the project name. So now when I go to do my print preview, I will see that it's now using the name of task ID 0 as the project name. Also, if I'm working with master projects, that's the name I'm going to see when I insert this project into a master. So now that I have all of my WBS elements, all I have to do is work with my indent and outdent buttons that are underneath my task ribbon to set up the structure for my project. So I just determine or identify or re-identify what items are sub-elements under other WBS elements. And this is how I set up my structure. And once I have it all set up, then I'm able to focus on just certain levels of the structure. So for example, if I only want to look at my top level deliverables, I can go in under my view ribbon and there's an option here called outline, and it allows me to display whatever level of information I want to. So for example, if I said, just show me my level 1 items, what that's going to do is it's going to just show me the top level deliverables from my project. I can expand and collapse anything at any time individually, or I can come back here and say, okay, now let's look at level 2. Now it's going to show me the next level of detail in my project. So it really allows me to focus in on various levels based on however many indentation levels, how many levels I've broken my WBS down into. So now I have my WBS entered into my project. When I'm ready to see everything again, I come back in under Outline and select all subtasks, and now I've got everything here. One of the things I mentioned in the slide is that you should never type in or never enter a duration or a start or a finish for a summary task. And let me show you what happens if we do. This task mode is the field that holds whether a task is auto-scheduled or manually scheduled. So what you always want to see is this little bar with an arrow. If I actually select a date or type in a date for a summary task, notice that that icon changed. It changed into a little thumbtack. That tells me that it's manually scheduled. We don't want manually scheduled items in our project. So if I accidentally do that, what I can do instead is come back here, change it back to manually scheduled. Whoops. It's not taking it. Huh. Okay. Anyway, I'm not sure why it's not taking it right here, but I would change it back to manually scheduled, and then that's going to allow me to, I don't know, it's going to allow me to get it back to auto-scheduled and continue on with letting project actually truly calculate dates based on all the information that I've built in. I also want to just mention that there is a field called WBS that you can insert into your project. And what that's going to do is it's going to also show you the structure. So it's actually created as I enter tasks into the project. Project's going to automatically set the WBS value based on where it falls in the structure. So once I've entered everything and set up my indentation levels, I can use this to help me make sure that everything is set up at the right level. So it's only at this point that I'm really ready to start entering detailed tasks, the work, the actions, the things I need to do in order to produce all of these deliverables, to create my project and deliver whatever the project objective is to my customer. So it's really critical before you just jump in and start typing tasks into project that you think through things like your schedule management plan topics, that you set up your project options so that as you're entering tasks, you're going to get the correct information, the information that you're looking for. And then also to make sure that we get our WBS set up and entered into our project schedule. So any questions about any of these topics? Okay, you guys are a pretty quiet group this morning. All right, so I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. If you do end up having questions, I have a slide that's coming up with contact information that you can send questions, or if you're interested in more information about Project Online or whatever you're curious about. I do also recommend that you check out, we have a a combination e-learning and ebook available. We have two versions, actually. We have Microsoft Project eAcademy, which is for those of you that are working with Project on the desktop. And then we also have a version that we're just releasing called Project Online eAcademy for project managers. So that's really focusing on the project manager role. So it talks about all the critical things for developing good dynamic schedules, but it also talks about the Project Online functionality and how to work within that. So each of these has over 300 pages of content. It includes videos, it includes exercises, etc. So lots of information for you. In fact, I've got a minute here, so I'm just actually going to show you really quickly what it looks like. Let me bring my slide over here. So this is what the eAcademy looks like. It's as I said, it's a combination e-learning and ebook. So when you come into eAcademy, what you're going to see here are all of these topics. These are the various topics that are covered in, this is the Microsoft Project version. So what you can do is you can look for the appropriate topic. You can work through it if you're really trying to learn from scratch. You can work through it from the beginning, starting with the introduction, going through the lesson 1, etc. But if you've sort of been using Project a bit and you're just interested in specific topics, you can go and find those topics and just focus in on those. So again, we have both content areas, which is, for example, this one. We have videos and we have exercises. So if I want to go and learn about how to create and work with tasks in Microsoft Project, I can select that option. It's going to bring me into a large topic section, which talks about best practices for creating tasks, how to actually put them into your project schedule, all sorts of things having to do with working with tasks in your project. Once I've read about it, I can then go and I can access the video that will show me that information. Actually, I went into the wrong option here. So I can go in and I can find the video that's relevant for that particular topic. So right here is where I go to the video. So the videos stream, you can look at them full page. It really kind of talks through the whole topic. So it demonstrates the information that we talk about in the content area. So it actually goes through and does a demonstration for you. And then finally, following that, there are exercises to give you a chance to practice each of those topics. So you can really get in and work with them as well. So that is it for us. This is the slide here that has contact information. If you want some additional information on whether it's eAcademy or working with Project Online, please feel free to contact us, and I thank you all for being here. Have a great day.